everybody to the 2022 Colorado Pollinator Summit. I'll be your host, Dr. Adrian Carper. I'm a research associate at the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado Boulder and in the CU Boulder Museum of Natural History. You've heard me talk at this summit before. I'm going to try to limit how much I talk, but I am going to make you listen to me in the beginning for a little bit as we go through an intro. So our theme this year is scaling pollinator conservation for a new era. And so growing, progressing, and transforming our individual conservation actions to try to affect collaborative or collective conservation changes. And the first thing I wanted to do in this intro was thank all of our sponsors, right? So without our sponsors, Wild Ones, Plant Select, the Sierra Club, Scott and Teresa Beck, and the City of Boulder, we wouldn't have financial support to bring you a summit. And this is a transitional summit. If you haven't noticed already, we've been remote for the past couple of years, right? And how great it is to see all of you guys in one room together. It's been a very challenging couple of years, and to have all of their support is really helping, is what helps us bring you, hopefully, an informative and engaging summit. I'd also like to thank our summit partners, so Colorado Pollinator Network, the Butterfly Pavilion, the Denver Botanic Gardens for hosting us today, City of Boulder again, they do a lot, Colorado State University Extension, the People and Pollinators Action Network, Denver Audubon, and the Museum of Natural History, because all of these organizations devote time, resources, money, and people to help you guys learn about pollinators, us to help impact your goals and initiatives, how you want to affect pollinator conservation here in Colorado and beyond. But by far, this summit is really the brainchild of the Colorado Pollinator Network. And so if you're familiar with the network, or if you're part of it, it was established in 2016. Am I speaking loud enough for everybody holding the mic? This is established in 2016 after our very first Colorado Pollinator Summit with a mission of bringing organizations together to try to work collaboratively to help conserve, protect, and create pollinator habitat while educating communities across the state about the importance of pollinators, right? And one of the big things that we do as a network is sharing information about the best practices, resources, and knowledge to support education initiatives about pollinators, conservation practices, or restoration practices for the creation of pollinator habitat, and also support for research on pollinators within our state. In last year's virtual summit, our theme was promoting pollinators through collaborative conservation. So I thought for the intro, what I would like to do is to show you some of what we've done as a network and all of the different organizations within our network over the past year to affect pollinator conservation here in Colorado. I'm walking around with an advancer, and yet I still walk up to the computer to click it. So I got to get my cheat sheet here. Sorry, I set it down somewhere, because I've got to read everybody else's accomplishments. I in no way take credit for any of these, but so much cool stuff to talk about. We'll start out with the Butterfly Pavilion. The Butterfly Pavilion, as you probably already know, does a lot of conservation within the state, but they also impact their communities. So they had over 90 older adults participate in their Healthy Habitats program, which brings therapeutic horticulture to assisted living and memory care facilities. A theme that you'll hear throughout the summit today is that pollinators not only help our food and our ecosystems, but us, right? Our human health and well-being depends on pollinators. They also had environmental and ecological services provided to land managers and did things like building pollinator districts, not only here in Colorado, but across the world, like in the Turks and Caicos, am I saying that right? Caicos Islands. They also continue to run the Colorado Butterfly Monitoring Network, which last year had 59 volunteers, covered 73 routes surveying butterflies, and observed 14,000 butterflies in that year. That's a lot of data collected, which you'll see a little bit about why that's important here in just a little bit. They also continue to run the Urban Prairies Project, which trains and mobilizes restoration master volunteers, and now has habitat restoration projects in 6 different communities, including Aurora, Brighton, Broomfield, Lafayette, Louisville, and Westminster. And they continue to contribute invertebrate expertise to bioblitzes across the Front Range, including the CSU Spur Campus and the Sand Creek Greenway. So a lot. They're very active within the community, and a big thanks to Butterfly Pavilion for all that they do. PPAN, the People and Pollinators Action Network, is also extremely engaged within conservation within Colorado, and also at the agency and policy level. So they not only did things like co-host 5 native plant seed swaps along the Front Range, where people could get access to native flora to plant in your gardens to support native pollinators, but they also helped pass a pollinator resolution in the city of Loveland. And they work with legislators on Colorado's first omnibus pollinator and human health bill, State Bill 131, which sought solutions to protect children's health, to preserve pollinator biodiversity, and allow local communities to have more control in decision making when it comes to pesticides and pesticide use on their in their areas. Sorry, but they also let me advance here. They also championed and helped to pass Colorado's first native pollinating insect protection study bill, State Bill 199, which basically has the DNR first address pollinators through a contractual study on diversity, health, conservation, and management of wild pollinators in our state. And this bill will be critical because it'll help provide data and impetus for the Department of Natural Resources to start conserving pollinators within our state, right? And provide the kind of information that they need to be able to do that. So we'll talk more about that when we get to our wrap-up and about tomorrow's event. If you're not aware, we also now have a Colorado state license plate. PPAN also started processing applications for the pollinator license plate donations, and the proceeds from these license plates are going to be creating a new pollinator habitat protection fund in 2023. So every license plate that gets sold will help create habitat for pollinators in our state. It's a beautiful design. If you're not familiar, this is one of our most common bumblebees, Hunt's bumblebee on a blanket flower. I've done my part through the University of Colorado Museum of Natural History, so I'm a scientist. I mostly talk to scientists about data in my research. Last year at the Entomological Society of America, a global audience heard me talk about why it's so important to engage with community initiatives to help spur local conservation action. Most people think of academics as sitting in their offices doing their data. It's kind of like an elite within academic community. I like to get out in the community and talk about not only my research, but how you can use the data from that research to do stuff, right? And so I gave an example of the Colorado Pollinator Network. This was an email that I got through the network from the Department of Agriculture. And the email was concerning, should we allow an exemption in Colorado for the importation of Bombus impatiens, the eastern bumblebee, for the greenhouse pollination of tomatoes? So if you're familiar with tomatoes, they gotta have bumblebees or some other native bee to pollinate them because honeybees can't. And so in the East Coast, people have reared, now they've managed Bombus impatiens, the eastern bumblebee, release them in greenhouses, they pollinate their tomatoes, you can get bigger and more tomatoes. Sounds great. Why don't we allow it in Colorado? Well, it doesn't occur here, but it's been introduced in other western states, primarily around the Pacific Northwest. Not only that, where it's been accidentally introduced, it's brought its pathogens and diseases with it, and those have been implicated in the decline of native western bumblebees. And so all I had to do was just get in touch with them, send them some resources, and they made the decision on their own that with the evidence we have in hand, maybe it's not the right thing to do right now, right? At the same point in time, other researchers are trying to manage western bumblebee species for this very same reason. So I put them in contact with them to let them know, hey, where are we at in that process, right? So huge conservation impact just by me getting an email through the network. Deep breath. I'm going to try to slow down. I get really excited talking to a group. Sorry. And so for this summit, right, you just heard a lot about collaborative efforts, what the network does. For this summit, we thought that a theme of scaling our pollinator conservation efforts would be really good, right? Because a lot of us are already doing a lot. The question becomes, how do we have more impact? So how do we grow our own conservation efforts? How do we help others progress in their conservation efforts? And how can we transform our individual conservation actions to have a bigger impact collectively? So I just put together a handful of bullet points of what I thought would be an easy way to say what I would imagine this kind of transformative action could be. So you're already, say, in your backyard, creating or maintaining habitat for wild pollinators, right? If you want to transform your own individual action, it's really easy to help train others in doing the exact same thing, right? Not only about spreading the words, but where do you find your plants? How do you water? There's a whole lot of nuts and bolts into maintaining quality habitat for pollinators. And if you can help others learn those things, you transform your own impact, right? And that's really key, right? Because habitat loss is the biggest driver of all biodiversity loss, not just pollinators. And so by creating more habitat, that's the biggest thing you can do to help with biodiversity loss. If you're already aware of the importance of data, right, like me as a researcher, if you want to transform your impacts, how can you convince others that having data is really key, knowledge is key, to be able to create conservation action and to know just how at risk our pollinators are, right? Because most people just aren't aware about how at risk some of our pollinators are. If you're already aware of pollinators, which I'm probably preaching to the choir here, you're all here, right? You're concerned about pollinators already because you value them, right? You understand that we rely on pollinators, and pollinators have intrinsic value too, right? They have a right to exist on their own. If you can help increase other people's awareness and valuation, you might be able to do that through, say, increasing your impact through outreach and education. How do you reach bigger audiences? How do you reach more diverse audiences, right? How do you reach user groups which wouldn't necessarily align with your ideals or values? So 3 simple ways in different fields within pollinator conservation that you may be interested in where you can help transform your conservation impact. So I thought I'd give an example of me. So I'm a scientist. I'm kind of in the business of creating knowledge, right? So I value this a lot and trying to understand just how at risk our pollinators are. And this is a slide that I show about what we know about pollinators in Colorado. So people have aggregated data on animals for a long time. And this is publicly available data from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. This is all of the animal records that I could find in this online repository for Colorado. 15.8 million observations of an animal in Colorado. Anybody want to guess what passerines are? All this green? Birds. We know a lot about birds. 15 million observations published for birds in Colorado. We know so much that we've got conservation statuses for every single one of them. Some, like pigeons, are everywhere, and we're not concerned about them at all, right? Other ones, like, say, sage grouse, maybe we are. And they have conservation statuses which reflect our knowledge of their changing populations or distributions. Look at insects, much, much smaller. 500,000. If we look at bees, some of our most important pollinators, 70,000 points of data. Sound like a lot, right? How many species of bees do we have in Colorado? Nearly 1,000, right? That's not a whole lot of data per species of bee in Colorado. In fact, bees make up less than half of 1% of all of our knowledge of where animals live across the state. So as concerned as we are about them, we know relatively little next to everything else, which already has conservation statuses. And so I thought I'd show how that's changing because of you guys and because of us. So in 2020, I helped host the summit, and I put this slide up there looking at iNaturalist data. Anybody use iNaturalist? Show of hands. Whoa, a lot of people. iNaturalist is a cool tool because you don't have to be a taxonomic expert to contribute. All you got to do is take a photo, and somebody will try to identify it as far as they can. So these are all records from Colorado in 2020 as observations of bees. There were about 1,000 different people who had taken photos of bees and published them on iNaturalist, and that have been identified to about 155 different species. How's that changed just in the past couple of years? We've got nearly 3 times more people contributing data, right? Over 3,300 people now using iNaturalist and contributing records of bee distributions across the state. They've contributed over 4 times more number of observations, right? So we know now about 4 times more bees than we ever knew before. And we've added about 13 new species than what people had observed in the past. And so we're growing a lot in terms of how much we know about pollinators across the state. These are probably too small for y'all to see, maybe not. I just ranked everybody because I was curious. There's the top 3. Anybody in this room one of these users? Come on, I want to see a hand go up. Pam's not here. I don't know who Room Thilly is. They took the cake at 353 in terms of observations. If anybody knows Pam, she loves biodiversity. She's recorded more species than anyone else. I recognize a few names up here, but I didn't see my own. I was like, wait a minute, where am I at? Number 66, only 43 observations? Man, I gotta get on the ball. But a lot of mine come from outside Colorado too. And as a researcher, I do things like this. So these are all focus stacked images that we've taken of species within our museum. Right? One of the reasons people don't know about or value bees is because they're so weird. They're alien to most people. These don't look anything like a honeybee, right? You got a giant ninja bee here versus this tiny little thing over there, right? That have all kinds of different ecologies and natural histories. But creating images like this are really useful for outreach and education. These are all public source, all Creative Cloud licenses. You can use these in your education and outreach, right? And look at this Osmia ribiflorus. It's beautiful, right? If you can get these kind of images to people, it can really help with your own, with my impacts as a researcher. We can also get you guys to help us, right? So like I got a grant to basically database about 50,000 records within our museum. So most natural history museums have tons of specimens like this. This is a bee on a pin that's been preserved since 1936. The data on where it was collected and what species it is exists nowhere else but on that paper label, right? And so museums are employing you guys. This is Notes from Nature, a community science platform. You can log on, anybody can. You can pull up this picture and you can transcribe all that date locality label for us, and then we'll get it. And it helps us get all that distributional knowledge out there for other researchers to use. We're also, through this project, doing some other things, like you saw those 2D focus stacked images of cool bees. We're now doing it from every angle around the bee that we can, so that we can get 3-dimensional views, and to create new technological methods for people to be able to interact with our museum. So this is a really, really bad 3D rendering from those 3D images that I made of this Hoplites fulgida. And so you can really imagine that having technological tools like this could also be really cool for outreach and engagement, right? Not only from our museum perspective, but again, making them publicly accessible for other people to use to help make people excited and concerned about our pollinators. So we're going to have a lot of different topics at the summit today. We've brought together a huge cadre of specialists and experts and people with experience in their relative fields. We're going to hear a really engaging keynote about pollinator diversity and conservation and how it's changed through time. I'm really looking forward to that. We're also going to have a panel on exploring the impacts of honeybee management on wild bee conservation, which is a growing topic of concern that a lot of people haven't thought about before, but I'll save that for the panel. We'll also hear a presentation about, again, those human health impacts of native plant policies. So how biodiversity helps support human health and well-being. We'll have a rousing call to action after lunch. And then we'll talk about some of our recent legislation and how we can leverage our laws for pollinator conservation within the state, and then how we can grow our own education and outreach impacts through increasing our audience. So if you haven't had a chance, there is, if you've picked up one of these, you can see some of Steve's books. Definitely check them out. I think that's all I really have for right now. Oh, I wanted to put a plug in for this. If you didn't notice in the emails, tomorrow we're going to be having a collaborative exploration meeting. So these are photos from last year to help lay the groundwork for some of our goals over the next year. This will be at the Butterfly Pavilion tomorrow from 9 to 11. You can RSVP if you want to come in person to Amy Yarger, or you can check us out on Zoom. So we'll have a live Zoom link there if you want to come and just, what do they call it when you just like sit around in the background looking at everything? Do I? Yeah, if you just want to come and lurk just to see what's going through all of our minds, totally fine. But we want to hear from you guys, right? To see what you're concerned about, what you'd like to see us try and work on. And that can have some really big impacts on what each of our organizations do in the future. And so before I sign off, I just want to go ahead and get a preemptive thank you for all of our participants today, right? Because they're taking time out of their busy schedules and their resources to come here and talk to us. So a big preemptive thank you to everybody who's going to be participating today. And I think with that, I'm probably going to turn it over to Amy here to talk, just give you some nuts and bolts, right, about what to expect for moving around the summit today.
Well, I read in a great book called The Art of Gathering that you should never welcome people to a party by telling them where the bathroom is. But that is my role because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to have an inspiring and exciting day. And I'm so glad to see you all in person, to see your smiling faces. Some of you are smiling, some of you aren't smiling. But anyway, so I do have some nuts and bolts. The first thing is, please turn your cell phones to silent, please. Just so that everyone can enjoy the talks. Bathrooms, of course, there are bathrooms outside the auditorium and then across from Mitchell Hall. You have to bring in that hierarchy of needs. You know, if you aren't taking care of your body, you're not taking care of anything. And then we do have some pretty quick turnarounds, but I do want to encourage you to visit our exhibitors over lunch. Lunch is a great time to network, to meet people. It's going to be delicious. It's in Mitchell Hall between 12 and 1. But also, if you have a chance, we have some partner organizations set up in Classroom 4, which is just down the stairs and kind of around the corner. There is a sign to help direct you so that you can kind of find out about more what's happening in the community. And then my final note is that none of the doors will be locked, so please keep your valuables with you as you go from place to place today. Other than that, looking forward to interacting with all of you today. Thanks so much for being here. Oh, one more thing. Thanks to all of our volunteers without whom we would not be able to run this event. Thank you.
All right. So let's take a quick little 10-minute break as we get set up for our keynote. And if you need to make a pit stop, grab a sip of water while you're out there. I'll see you back here in just a few.